What's up, everybody? You're here with the Illustrated Underground today. I'm John,
Yo, I'm Q.
and today we're here with the legendary Steve Englehart. We're going to talk about Batman, but Mr. Englehart has written a lot of different stuff. He's written for a lot of Marvel, the Avengers, Silver Surfer, some of the Guardians of the Galaxy, Star-Lord, Mantis, but today we're going to be focusing on his work with his legendary work on Batman and a lot of the formative stuff for the Batman that we know today. Mr. Englehart worked on and created a foundation.
For sure. We just want to first say thank you for being with us.
Well, you're welcome. Nice to be here.
Yes, we're very excited to be talking to you. But so let's just get right into it. One of the first things that me and Quincy think of your issues on Batman being a big like formative moment for is like you did a lot of work in Batman in the 70s, which is like a transitionary period for the character, where like in the 60s and 50s he was widely considered a joke. Like he was less serious, probably because of a lot of the Adam West show and the Comics Code Authority. So when you made that shift from that less serious to dark Batman, was that a shift that was more purposeful, like something that you wanted to do or were told to do, or is it just how you saw the character of Batman?
Well, it's what I wanted to do because that's how I saw the character. I was a kid in the 50s, and so I read the 50s Batman and every once in a while had Dick Sprang artwork on it. You guys know Dick Sprang? Really intense
Off the top of my head.
perspective. He was you should look him up. He was the best Batman artist in the 50s because he did a lot of forced perspectives and stuff, and it made things look weird, which was always the cool part about Batman. But they did everything blanded out in the 50s. In the 60s, Julie Schwartz rebooted him with Carmine Infantino, the new look Batman, whatever. But right after that, the TV show came out. And so when I went over to DC in the 70s, one of the things I was told was that everybody thinks he's a joke. People don't, they all think of it in terms of the TV show, no matter what the comics do. And I thought that was, a good place for me to jump in because I really like dark characters. Every once in a while, DC would publish a giant sized issue or something, and it would have some story from like 1940. And those stories were always really interesting. They were quirkier and darker and, had people like Hugo Strange. And they had like an insane serial killer Joker, which had been lost since 1940, basically. Even in the new look Batman, he was still living at the ha ha hacienda and doing funny things. And I just thought there'd been so much that was cool about the original Batman that had been lost as they tried to make him a family friendly, appeal to everybody kind of thing. So I wanted to bring that back. I wanted to get that pulp ambiance and really make him darker again. But at the same time, I am interested in who's inside the costume. When I did the Green Lantern Corps, somebody said to me, "How can you do a group where everybody has the same powers?" And I said, "It's not about the powers, it's about all these different people who were in the Green Lantern Corps." So that was kind of my theory all the way along that it's like Batman. We were talking a little before we started recording about whether Batman rules Bruce Wayne or Bruce rules Batman. And I would say that in practical matters, Batman rules Bruce Wayne, but Bruce Wayne does exist and Bruce Wayne does run an empire theoretically, I mean, it's like, so I thought we've really, I'd really like to get inside Bruce Wayne, the guy who's doing all this, even though Batman is still the driving force. And that tied up finally with something that I wanted to do for a long time. When I was a kid, reading 50s comics, I still thought it was weird that when Lana Lang would snuggle up to Batman or Batwoman or any of these people, he would kind of back off. So I wanted Batman to have sex. I wanted him to have a grown up relationship with a grown up woman to really see that side of him, the human side. And then I was able to tie it together so it tied into the Batman thing too. So I was trying to bring back what had been lost and then try to move it forward at the same time. That's, something I like to do.
Yeah, you really did push Batman forward as a character, and there's so much of your ideas of Batman that are still baked into Batman to this day, which I think is awesome. And what I really love about your work is that you do take that serious tone, but you also still have aspects of it that are fun and adventurous, and
Mm.
like specifically like the romance with Silver St. Cloud is something
Yeah.
that like makes it there. It gives it a little bit of like groundedness to it. It feels very realistic.
Humane,
Yeah.
just Batman, as you're saying, this like darker character. To hey, he can still have moments where he's at peace, at comfort.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what kind of like inspired, was it something like TV shows that you had watched or movies? What kind of inspired you to have that balance of being dark but also being fun?
Well, by that time, I was a seasoned professional. I had 3 years under my belt or whatever it was. But I mean, you're writing 4 stories a month. So in 3 years, I'd written 50 stories. I don't know. And so I figured that I had a pretty good sense of how to tell an interesting story by that time. And so it was just a question of what do I want to do with the Batman? And then the other thing was I had left Marvel and decided to take a break from comics. And my wife had traveled in Europe for a year before I met her. So I thought, well, that sounds like a cool thing to do. Why don't we just go to Europe for a while? I had never been at that point. And so we started making plans, reservations, all that stuff. And then Jeanette Kahn called me up. She had just been appointed publisher at DC. DC was not doing well, so she was brought in to see if she could come up with some way of doing something improving their fortunes. And one of the first things she did was try to hire John Buscema and me. And Stan wouldn't let John Buscema go, but I'd already quit. So she brought me in. She said, I want you to do what you did with the Avengers for the Justice League. And that's exactly how she put it. I had taken this group and they all had personalities and they all had stories. And she recognized that the Justice League was just a bunch of statues, really. I mean, they were all icons, but they didn't have much, and they had girlfriends, but it didn't amount to much. So she wanted me to do Justice League. And I said, yes, but I can only do it for so long because I've already kind of put an end date on my abilities to be here. In addition to that, I want to write the Batman because I love the Batman my whole life. And I never thought I would get a chance. I was a Marvel writer. I was never going to get a chance to write Batman. Now I was working for DC, talking to the publisher who really wanted me to come over there. So I said, I want to do Batman too. And so I did. And so right away, I'm thinking, all right, here's what I want to do: bring back darkness, have sex, and all in 7 issues, because that's all that was scheduled at that point. It later turned into 8 issues because the early issues sold well enough that they threw an extra issue in the summertime, which was good. It made the story flow even better. But I knew that it was going to be like a beginning, a middle, and an end, and then I was going to be gone. So I really wanted to take everything that I had always wanted to do with the Batman and do it right there which is why that stuff is nice and tight. Everything is moving right along. Different characters. I got to do a Penguin story. I got to put Robin in there. All this stuff. I knew it was a limited thing. And so I was totally focused on what's the best Batman that I can do. What, in my opinion, what should the Batman be? And that's what I want to do. I should say, and this is pretty well known, but I didn't know who was going to draw those scripts. And the odds were because that it was going to be just a couple of second level guys just doing it. So, and I've said a million times, people can't distinguish. Most people don't see they read a comic book. They don't think, oh, the writer did this, but the artist did this. And I like one, but I don't like the other. And the same scripts, exact same scripts. If they'd been drawn by anybody less than Marshall Rogers and Terry Austin, I'm pretty sure people would go, well, those are okay but it's like, wasn't special. I was fortunate enough that those two guys were on the spot when it came time to find somebody to draw these things because they really didn't. All of their former stars, Gil Kane, Neil Adams, they'd all gone to Marvel by that time. So, that whole project was just sort of, I don't want to use the word blessed because that's bringing in parts of the, I'm not religious in that sense, but I mean, it was just like everything came together just very nicely for that book. And we all did the work. And those guys wanted to do the best Batman they could too. So there it is. But so much of it was just happenstance that it worked out that way.
We always talk about on our podcast like how important it is to have a really strong union between the artist and the writers. Like they both need each other and feed into each other for a book to be good. And the artists that you work with are phenomenal. I mean, really brings that like dark, gloomy vibe that you were going for, that your Batman had. And we've said before, like your run is, it's 8 issues. It's not sprawling, but it's so definitive and like you cover so much room in that. And one thing we wanted to ask was like, you have a lot of characters in those issues that you wrote. What would you say was your favorite character other than Batman to
Joker,
write in
the
that book?
Joker.
Hugo?
Yeah, no, I love the Joker, but I also like Silver St. Cloud. I like doing her. But I mean, Batman and the Joker go together. And if you want to do a good Batman run at some point, although it's become sort of a cliche now, I mean, the Joker, as I say, had been pretty much relegated to comedic background stuff. And now, there's a zillion Joker stories since then. So I've almost gotten to the point. I mean, I said a couple of years ago that people should back off on the Joker a little bit and give somebody else a shot, like maybe the Penguin. And then I had nothing to
Yeah.
do with the HBO series, but I mean, they made the Penguin an interesting, an interesting guy because he has all those villains. And to me, the Joker is up here. All the other villains are here, right? I mean, they're all good. Two-Face and the Scarecrow and all those guys, they're all good ones. But the Joker is just sort of a special. He's probably the most interesting villain in all of comics, and it's the yin yang between him and Batman that interests me. I mean, it's like the Joker's nuts. To me, the Batman is so driven that if he went one step farther out, he might go over the edge. But he doesn't go over that. He doesn't take that step because he's in control. But he operates as far out as he can get. The Joker is farther out and has sort of lost touch with keeping control of it. Although I'm always interested, the Joker's plans. He wants to plan a bank robbery, so he decides he needs a horse and a lollipop somewhere in that plan. But the plan makes sense. I mean, the plan works, right? It doesn't usually get thwarted when he's doing these evil things. So I think it's kind of cool to just get inside the head of somebody who doesn't think linearly, but can still hold it all together. So, yeah, to answer your question, Joker is the most interesting of those guys, I think.
It's a really good segue into your issue, like the Laughing Fish, which is one of my favorite comic book issues like ever of Batman. I really love that issue because it's exactly what you said, where it's like you take something so absurd and strange and almost a little bit funny, but it works and he gets away with it. So how did you, because I think that is such a creative idea for a Joker scheme. Like when I think of Joker schemes, I immediately think of the fish. How did you come up with that?
It just seemed weird, I mean, I wanted something where you could see why he thought that it made sense, and at the same time, it doesn't make sense. I wanted to show his craziness, like you experience his craziness. And, I just made up a thing about a horse and a lollipop. But I mean, laughing fish, I mean, it seemed funny enough. Marshall drew that great cover later of him holding the two fish like guns. Wasn't in my consciousness at the time, but I mean, fish can be funny. And that's kind of the deal with him. Since we did our stories, he's become much more of a psycho serial killer doing totally evil things and all that. I'm still, from that era, I wanted to make him evil, but I did think that there was a humorous aspect in there too, and didn't want to lose that. I just didn't want him living at the ha ha hacienda anymore. So yeah, it just, it's one of those things you sit down to write and You're just, ideas are coming and you're going, I can use this one, and you have this one, and then you put them together, and somewhere in there came laughing fit. Well, laughing because he's the Joker and he's got the permanent grin, but I like the idea that you should be able to copyright fish with his face on it. That, seems sensible enough, doesn't it?
I also love the animated series episode based on that. That's just such a. I feel like your work influenced the animated series a lot. I grew up on the animated series, so I see a lot of that like dark brooding, but also tender. Like a lot of the romances in the animated series reminds you of some of your stuff too.
I was gonna talk about Silver St. Cloud. I feel like in that run, like that was definitely like an integral relationship to Bruce and to Batman too. And obviously the stuff that went on there, I don't really want to get into it as much as for this conversation, but if we do, that's definitely good. I'm gonna get into it. So with her like being able to find out, okay, Bruce Wayne is Batman, do you ever think that Bruce Wayne can ever be happy or have a relationship with this mask he wears with being Batman, with the weight that this role brings him and gives him?
Well, that was something I was going to explore over time, and that gets into DC internal politics. But as you guys know, it took 30 years before we were asked to do Batman again. And it made sense to me to sort of continue the Silver St. Cloud story. That was the second run. And then I wrote the scripts for a third run, and Marshall died after penciling the first issue. And without getting too into the weeds here, but there was a contingent, as it turns out, that didn't appreciate the fact that an outsider was brought in to help save the company. Back when Jeanette asked me to come over there are people who got their noses bent out of shape at DC because they thought, well, who's this guy? Why is she turning to him when we're already here? I didn't know any of that at the time, but I've certainly paid a price for doing something that pissed off some people at DC. And so when Marshall died, our editor called up Terry Austin, actually. Terry tells the story and said, there are people dancing in the aisles up here that we don't have to publish that now. They really don't like me, I guess. They ripped me off on the movie. They ripped me off here and there. So they didn't want to do this. And then last year, Jim Lee, who's now head of DC, asked me, could they publish that stuff? And yes. And I said, let's go. And he said, well, everything moves really slowly now because we don't have any staff anymore and blah, blah, blah. So it'll be a couple months before we can get started on this. I'm like, okay. A couple months go by. He texted me one Friday afternoon and said, we're going to have a go in 2 weeks. 2 weeks, we'll get the green light. And then 2 months went by and there was no further communication. So I finally checked back with him, and he had basically been overruled by whatever contingent in the hierarchy over there doesn't want to do that stuff. So once again, that stuff has never been published. The reason I tell you all that is in that third run, it continues the Bruce and Silver relationship. And what I had planned was a fourth run, which would bring that to some conclusion. And I don't know what the conclusion is. I'm not sure how Bruce and Silver would stay together because he's mostly the Batman. On the other hand, she's really strong. That's what I wanted her to be, somebody who could stand up to him. I could see a situation where he's out every night doing his thing, but she's running her conventions by day, and the two of them, just coexist as best friends and lovers and whatever, but they're not together all the time. But in any event, the third one, which is written, brings them back together. And then the fourth one would have resolved that one way or another. I went through all that with Jim, but apparently it wasn't his call. He thought it was, but it wasn't. At the moment, I don't know that you'll ever see the stuff that's already done, let alone another run to kind of tie it all up. But that was something I did want to explore, was like, I made her what I considered his perfect woman. Now you can argue that the Catwoman is, or Talia al Ghul, or these other people are his perfect women on other ways of looking at it. But in terms of somebody who was not a superheroine, but who could hang with a superhero, I just liked her as somebody who had, the guts enough and the strength enough to do all that stuff. I mean, it's not going to be where Batman marries Silver and all Batman stories by other people thereafter all have to take that into account. So I would have to do something. But I mean, that's part of writing. It's part of figuring out how you do the best version of what it is that you want to do here. I envisioned it once we started up again as sort of a 4-part thing, but there's only been 2 parts. What are you going to do? I can't do Batman if they don't let me do Batman.
Which is a shame because,
Yeah.
like we've said, your work on Batman is the part of the basis of what Batman is today. Like that darker tone for Batman wouldn't be there without people like your work in the 70s. So it is a shame that, you're not able to get that out there, because I think it would be really cool to
I think
see
so
your
too.
story come full circle and come to a conclusion.
I thought so. I mean, there's so many little mini series and spin-offs of Batman doing this and Batman doing that. I thought this would just fit in as just another one of those. And if at the end of it, you know, we get to the end of it, then it was a run. But it's just, I won't belabor it, but it is frustrating to have people
Yeah,
who
of
took
course.
offense at the fact that I did a good Batman.
Let's talk about another character that I really like your work on, Hugo Strange. We're
Yeah.
both
Yeah.
really big fans of that villain. I said before, I think before we started shooting, but I'm a psychology major, so I really appreciate him. As I feel like your work with him was one of the first like times that he went from being mad scientist-esque to more like psychologist, therapist-esque, and that was obsessed with the psychology of Batman. What made you look at Hugo Strange as like a mad scientist and be like, okay, I'm going to change him to this. This is more interesting.
I wanted to recapture what had happened in the 40s, and I had read this story and that story here and there. But DC in those days, probably still does, had a library where everything they'd ever published had been bound as books. They had everything that they'd ever done, but it was like nobody ever went there, right? I mean, it was just like that wasn't in DC's consciousness. But I said, I want to read those early detective comics. I want to read those early Batman stories. So they loaned me the books. I'm going through it, and there was Hugo Strange, right? And I was obviously focusing on the Joker. When I saw Hugo Strange, I thought, well, okay, that's a 40s villain that immediately says we're bringing back the pulp atmosphere to the whole thing without having to use the Joker that early in the process. He was a cartoon mad scientist supervillain in his original incarnation, and I tried to do a more humanistic version of this guy because we'd moved forward and so forth. I did not know. Again, my stories, the characters tell me my stories. I mean, I'll work out what characters are going to do probably, but I really find when I write the scenes and people are reacting to each other, sometimes the mood shifts, sometimes something changes where it's like I can still force you to go where I thought I was going to go, but they really want to go this way, and so let's go there. Let's see. I'll figure out how to make it all come together later. That's why they pay me. I did not know that Hugo Strange was going to die and come back as a ghost when I first introduced him, but again, that's where the stories as they came together, that's what happened. As far as I'm concerned, he was dead and he is a ghost. I know they brought him back, and comic book villains, comic book characters never die, right? They always come back. But I liked my little version of him where he was dead, and I stole that. I stole that from Dick Tracy. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Dick Tracy anymore, but Chester Gould, when he was doing Dick Tracy, it was kind of like Batman. It wasn't. It's a detective cop rather than a guy in a costume. But the villains were all really weird, and it had this nice artwork and all this kind of stuff. And in the early '60s or late '50s, there was a Dick Tracy story in which one of Gould's villains killed a young girl, and then she came back as a ghost and hung around his neck, drove him crazy. That's where I stole it from. I always liked that story when I read it back in the day and thought, well, everything else is in this Batman. What about a ghost? He operates on the edge of fantasy, I mean, he's a realistic character. I mean, he lives in a real world, but he's out there on the edge all the time. And so very adjacent to stuff like that. The ghost would work, would make for an interesting turn of events.
I'm personally a very big fan of when Batman melds with horror, and I wish that's something that I really don't see done as much anymore, but I know in like the 70s and 80s, there was a lot of like Batman with ghosts and spirits and monsters and stuff, like you said, where he rides on the edge of fantasy. I really love that stuff. I think he works really well with horror.
Yeah, and I like how they serve as like foils for like Batman himself. Monsters and different just characters just serve as foils for what he's been through. And I love this take on Hugo Strange, just like showing him like fixated, intrigued with Batman and like how he's just like what makes, Batman and just trying to dissect that or whatnot. The art too, because as we were talking about like the relationship between the art and the writer, it just really dissects and you just get to see the mind within Bruce Wayne, like when he's trapped and you just see like him, like I feel like it's just like an open gateway to like his mind and like what like just goes on in there like by some of the panels and just wow.
Yeah, and his mind is an interesting place to be. I mean, again, he's primarily Batman. I mean, he's primarily focused on doing what Batman does, which is weird and on the edge and all that kind of stuff. It's not like Severance. He hasn't cut off the Bruce Wayne part. The Bruce Wayne part is still there. I did a story right at the end of my time at DC. It was just a one shot about like the first week of Bruce Wayne trying to have dates with girls and be Batman at the same time. And the moral of the story is it doesn't work. He can't continue to be a playboy seeing somebody on a regular basis when he's out there starting to run around on rooftops all night. And that dynamic still makes sense to me. If he and Silver were to get together, and again, I don't know the answer because the characters determine this, and it's like by the time I were to write those stories, all I can tell you is I'll bring it to an end, but I can't tell you what the end is. I've done a Mad Hatter story that hasn't been published, and I had a good time writing the Mad Hatter. Haven't done Poison Ivy, haven't done Catwoman for that matter. I mean, so there's various big ticket people that I haven't done. Actually, that fourth one, if I was going to do it, it was going to be sort of a gauntlet of having to get through 6 separate villains, and they were all going to be in there. But I got to put in a word for Tweedledee and Tweedledum. That's just such a weird thing. The idea of making them work in a modern context would be fun for me. But I would say the big ticket items would be Poison Ivy and Catwoman, and a Mad Hatter story if they never published the other one, because I like the Mad Hatter.
All very interesting characters. I really like the zany and out there Batman villains because I think a lot of people like stick with the same ones, but like Tweedledee and Tweedledum, those are characters that I've not seen in a comic in a very long time.
And there's a good reason for that too. As I say, making them into something would be fun for me to do. I grew up with continuity. We don't do continuity anymore, but I pay attention to what has gone before. Probably not hankering to bring back all the space aliens from the 50s. And you go far enough back in the 50s, and there was that time when Professor somebody or other would send him and Robin back in time, and they'd go do stuff in Rome and all that, which I don't think we're going to be doing that again anytime soon. It wasn't a complete disaster between 1940 and 1976 or whenever, because there was some good stuff in there, but not an infinite amount. The way the Justice League was all icons, they were writing kind of for high-minded comic fans. We're not those sleazy comics. We're like serious. I don't think anybody paid much attention to who actually was reading those books after the mid 40s or whatever. Whoever they were writing for, it was all there was. When I was a kid in the 50s, that's all there was. Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, Martian Manhunter, Aquaman, maybe in the back of some other stuff. There was a DC approach to comics, and that's pretty much what I grew up with. But it's also the thing that I said I'd feel like I could transcend that. I feel like I could go somewhere beyond that. The Carmine Infantino stuff from 1964 and thereafter Beautiful. Carmine was a great artist, and that stuff was gorgeous. The stories got better. I don't know if you guys, what you guys have read or are able to get your hands on, but when they did that, it was Carmine was doing this fabulous artwork with better stories every other month. And then in between, it was still the Bob Kane studio turning out the traditional stuff. Kane was never a great artist, or he made all of his ghosts draw like him. So that stuff looked really strange next to Carmine's, so forth. But then, Julie got everybody involved. Gil Kane, everybody was doing stuff in there. And it became a much better book. But according to Jeanette, when I got there, the sales hadn't reflected it, that people still thought of the TV show. People weren't buying Batman as a comic book because it was one of those things where people knew what he was. He was a funny, lame character. So I took some pleasure in hoping to turn that around.
There are people that are going to be watching this that are maybe like a little bit younger that are going to hear that and be like, they can't even imagine Batman not being that brooding, dark, gothic character that you ushered in. So it's very interesting to hear how things were different back then, and like the industry was different back then, and kind
Yeah.
of like you worked a lot during a transitionary period, I feel like, in comic books where things were shifting to be a little bit more serious. What are some things, interesting differences you think you see in the industry back then versus now? They don't have to be like positive or negative, just things that are different.
Well, I mean, in those days, comics was all there was if you wanted comics. There was the Hulk TV show or the Batman TV show. There were a couple of very lame Captain America movies, and there was a middle of the road Doctor Strange movie. That was all extra stuff. I mean, when it came to comics, we sold million to a million and a half copies of things to the people who were interested in comics, and it was a bubble. People who liked comics bought comics. But everybody else knew that comics were crap. You know, comics were just for lowlifes and sailors. There's nothing good in comic books. I got into Marvel right in the middle of the Galactus Silver Surfer saga, and it was Jack Kirby being inked by Joe Sinnott. The story was really interesting, and I would show it to people. I'd say, "Look at this! Isn't this really like good to look at?" And they're like, "Nah, comics." So we entertained the people who wanted to be entertained, and now, of course, everybody knows who Iron Man is and Spider Man and because of the movies, and the books don't sell very many anymore. I mean, compared to what we were selling by any stretch of the imagination. When I was doing comics, and also total luck again, but when I started working for Marvel, Roy Thomas, the editor there, said, I have two rules. You have to turn it in on time every month, and it has to sell. And if you do those two things, you can do anything else you want to do. Because I have so many books now, I can't be micromanaging them. So it's up to you to sell Captain America or the Avengers or the Hulk or whatever it is. And so I was able to write whatever I thought would be interesting, would sell comic books and every month. When I got Captain America, it was just like, here, Captain America's not doing very well. It's either going to get canceled or maybe go bi-monthly unless you can think of something. Everybody else has tried. Here. As it happens, I thought of something, and then Captain America got turned around. But it's like, if you were to do that today, if somebody were to come up to you today and say, here, write Captain America, you would have to run it past 12 levels of vice presidents and editors and merchandising and marketing and movie people. I got to do whatever I wanted to do. Doing it today, I would have to get into that machine. 20 years ago, 25 years ago, I was asked to bring the Malibu characters. I'd worked for Malibu, for people who know what Malibu is, bring those characters into the Marvel universe. As it turns out, that didn't happen for other reasons.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting to see. Like almost back then, it seemed like there was, not that comics are bad by any means now, but like it almost seemed like there was a closer relationship between the artist and the writer and the fans that were reading the book. Whereas
Yeah,
now there's all this stuff between it.
I can't speak to that because I don't really know how the fans and artists react. I mean, people were into it. We were into it doing it for the people who are reading it. It's just that today, well, I was going to say about the Malibu characters, one of the things that they wanted me to do was write down what am I going to do in the first 12 issues. And I'm like, I have no idea what I'm going to do in the first 12 issues. Once I do the first issue, I'll be able to figure out the second issue, and, and I'll go from there. If I actually answered that questionnaire and then a year from now I'm writing issue 12 and I'm just checking off boxes, I would be bored out of my skull. I mean, it's like, plus, I have no idea where people would be a year from now. That's the difference in the industry now. You have to jump through all those hoops. And there are plenty of people who are doing that and, making it work unappetizing to somebody like me. All of us who were there in the 70s and even into the 80s under Roy and Jim Shooter. I mean, if they were to ask me back, and they have from time to time, what I say is, you'd have to just let me have complete control. You just have to let me do what I do if you want me, right? And the answer is always no. Well, we can't do that. We've got a system. We got associate editors and editors and an editor in chief, and then somebody at Disney and all that stuff. So that's the difference. When we were selling 1.5 million at the high end of things, everybody who bought those books was into those books, and they would write letters before email, right? So it was letters in envelopes with stamps, but they would write in and you'd read the letters and you'd see what the reaction was, and it might give you ideas. So then that would filter into the next story you told and so on. It was all everybody was on the same page, the writers and artists and the readers. We were all there, and that's what DC missed out on. DC never really had a warm, friendly, empathetic relationship with their readers, which is what I hoped to bring to DC, and apparently I did. Again, DC didn't necessarily appreciate it.
It's like, I feel like a big thing with the comics nowadays, and like speaks to what you were talking about. Like at one point, maybe in the early 2000s or early 2010s, the comics were influencing the movies a lot. But now it feels like the movies influence the comics a lot because the movies have made so much money and become so big.
Although comics and movies have different beats, right? One thing that I was really struck by in the early movies was fight scenes in comics are a chance to show off some artwork and do character development. People are thinking while they're fighting and so forth. And you can't do that in movies. In movies, when people fight, they fight, and that's it. So in some ways, comics are a better medium than film. They're certainly a lot cheaper to do. We're kind of at a crossroads on the movies right now. Marvel did let it kind of get away from them, got superhero fatigue going, and everybody got real excited for Superman. I don't know if the movies are ever going to get back exactly where they were, to be determined. But in terms of comics, and to go along with your point, a lot of what comics are now is a 6-issue miniseries, which can then be shown to the movie producer. People are writing comics with the idea that they can make a movie out of it, which is a legitimate business choice, but you're not thinking just in terms of comics anymore. You're thinking in terms of, how can this be a showcase for something else? Things have changed a lot.
Right now in comics, there's this legendary crossover that hasn't happened for a while. Marvel and DC have put out a few books together for the first time since I want to say the early 2000s. And you've done a lot of work with both companies. If you were given a chance at writing a crossover with Batman and a character from Marvel, what character would you be interested to see Batman meet?
Daredevil, probably. There's Daredevil is dark, and Daredevil would work. When we were going to bring the Malibu characters into Marvel, I was really excited about that concept because I really liked the idea. The Malibu characters had been famous. They were considered rock stars and all that in their world. And then to get dumped into the Marvel universe where nobody knew who they were. And conversely, they don't know that they're supposed to be in awe of Spider-Man. I thought that would be a really interesting thing to put those guys together. And so if that had happened, Nightman would be a Marvel character too, and Nightman would be the other one who would, fit in well with Batman. Moon Knight could, now I've talked myself into the idea of doing a story with Batman and Daredevil and Moon Knight, and Nightman if he were around. Put all those guys together and see what happens. There's a whole bunch of answers to your questions.
I think Daredevil and Moon Knight,
Yeah, that'd be sweet.
those are very interesting characters to go with them. We like to focus a lot on the creators behind comics and the process into making comics more than just reading comics and being a fan. I think writing is such a beautiful process. So what do you have to say about the writing process?
Well, I think you just have to put yourself inside the characters. You want to try to get inside that head. Batman and Captain America and the Silver Surfer and the Hulk and Doctor Strange and Wanda the Witch, they're all different people. And so you have to like just say, okay, today I'm the witch. I'm going to think like the witch. When you do that, then the characters do reveal to you how they would unfold. My advice would be you better have some idea of how you're going to bring it all to a conclusion at some point. But I totally think you should let the characters run free in you're behind the scenes somewhere, but they're still somehow fitting into the grand scheme of things. Even if you've spent 6 months working out the most detailed outline, if you start writing them and you try to just check boxes, you're not going to get there. I prefer to be as much in the moment and let people unfold on the page in front of me step by step.
It's very good advice because I feel like it's very easy to make an outline and stick to it and not. Some people are afraid when they're writing, me included. I know when I write like short stories and stuff, like it's hard to shift what you originally had in your head, even if that shift might be for the better.
I wanted to ask, since you brought up kind of your favorite Batman runs in his formative years, 1930s, 40s, and then the Neil Adams and Dennis O'Neil stuff, like the much noir takes to Batman. What do you think of like the darker takes and adaptation of Batman, such as Michael Keaton, like maybe who like are very brutal and don't hold back their punches, like Thomas Wayne from the Flashpoint universe?
Well, I loved Michael Keaton. The story at the time was that no major actor wanted to do the character because he'd have to have a mask over his face a bunch of the time. And Keaton was kind of like they'd done Beetlejuice together. But I thought Keaton was great because Keaton doesn't look formidable necessarily, but there's a darkness inside Michael Keaton. You can feel that there's something in there. And so I thought that was perfect for Batman. The first one, of course, was based on my stuff. And when I worked on that movie, so I saw it from all those sides. But the thing was, superhero movies to that point always had to be funny. They would do superhero movies, but they would put in Lex Luthor's stupid assistant, or they would put in the silly reporter in the Batman movie. I always had the sense that it was Hollywood people going, yeah, we're making a comic book movie, but it's like, we're better than that. Tim Burton committed, and I committed. But then they did the second Batman movie with Tim Burton and Michael Keaton. And then they went back to funny stuff, the humorous thing, which was stupid. It took Hollywood a while to really sort of grasp the concept of a serious movie. So now they've got it, and now here we are. But that was another thing. In addition to being bashful around girls, the idea that you always had to like sort of wink at the audience and go, "This, it's comics." That never appealed to me.
Yeah, because these characters are so layered and there's so much you could tell with them. It just is like doing a disservice. It takes you away a little bit. I definitely see where you're coming from.
I know Michael Keaton's Batman is a little bit like controversial because he doesn't pull back his punches, he kills, and I get that. But Batman back in the 40s didn't hold back his punches, let's be real. And I understand that got retconned and that wasn't,
Yeah.
main continuity Batman. It was like to me, I just like the darkness and the duality between like his Bruce and Batman because it's that double duality within it.
As we talked about, your run on Batman is so important, and we've talked about a lot of the characters, but one last thing I want to touch on before we close off for the night. What about Gotham City? How
Oh,
does
yeah.
that factor to your writing with Batman? Because you have all these great characters, but I feel like in your run, Gotham City started to have a life of its own and not just be this city that's just like Metropolis or
Yeah.
New York City, and like it really had its own life.
Yeah, and a lot of that is attributed to Marshall. Marshall had studied architecture before he got into comics, and I think he liked drawing the buildings and all that. I definitely saw Gotham City as contributing to the dark atmosphere of the whole thing. But again, I think it got even further clarified, further used when Marshall put his mind to it. We don't spend much time in stately Wayne Manor anymore, but his mansion out in the boonies somewhere with the cave underneath and the tunnel and all that good stuff. I mean, it's like he is not the only one who did that. I mean, the Green Lantern or Green Hornet, I'm sure plenty of people have done similar things, but he just sort of casts a spell. He's just got this ambiance that that makes everything fit together, and it fits all together in a nice noir fashion. But anyway, Gotham City, I did a little bit more because Marshall had really brought it out in the first run. I paid more attention to it in the later runs. And of course, Gotham City's supposed to be New York, but most people think Chicago looks more like Gotham City, just the architecture and the way it's put together. But a good city, a good solid city is a good place to be, whether it's New York or Chicago. You know, there's a lot of vibe in big cities like that. I have no sense of Metropolis. Metropolis just exists, but I have a pretty good sense of Gotham City.
I'm glad you brought up film noir because I'm like a big like film buff. The Naked City came to mind.
Right.
Akira Kurosawa, Stray Dog, like where like you have these films where like the city is like the character and it's embodied like within through all the elements of the comics. I just love your emphasis on the run of like Strange Apparitions with the city, Gotham City, being that character and almost being its own living embodiment.
When you were writing it, did you think of a specific city?
I have an image of Gotham City in my head. I'm from Indiana and went to New York. Back in the day, if you wanted to do comics, you had to physically go to New York because there was no FedEx, there was no internet. You had to hand things to people. So I'm just your standard Midwestern guy plunked down in New York City in the 70s when it was, when it was different from the way it is today. I learned what New York is like. And so that obviously gave me a template for what Gotham City could be. But Gotham is darker, got more architecture to it. I mean, it's like there's more stuff going on in Gotham than there is in New York. New York has the skyscrapers and long blocks and all that good stuff. But I mean, certainly getting to know the big city helped me define what I saw Gotham as.
I grew up in New Jersey, so I grew up in the city a lot, and I think it's like Gotham is similar to New York City, but it almost has its own thing. I like what you said about like the vibe of New York City, but like the architecture of Chicago, where it's got these more like gothic, like bigger than life buildings. These are all like elements that you included in your Batman run that just made it like as legendary as it was, and your stuff on the character has just influenced so much going forward. How does it feel to have had such like a definitive influence on the character?
Well, again, I'm happy to have done it, but I paid a price for it, and I can't totally separate those two. But I'm real pleased with how the whole Batman thing turned out, and the fact. I mean, I wanted to do my ultimate Batman. Marshall and Terry wanted to do their ultimate Batman, and we turned this thing out. And all of a sudden, people are going, "Wow, that's the definitive Batman." I can say we were surprised. I mean, we knew we were trying to do the best we could. So when people go, "Wow, this is pretty good," it's like, yeah, that was what we were trying to do. But at the same time, I mean, we never expected to turn DC around and stuff like that, which, it did. I grew up loving the Batman, so I got my chance to write him, one of my few chances to write him. And the fact that what I thought made Batman a good character, it's nice to know that other people think that too. But finally, a lot of that is just the fact that I was there in the 70s, I was able to do it before everybody else because I was there before everybody else. I give myself some credit for this, but I can't put my nose too high in the air, about it.
Your run on Batman, like the Strange Apparitions, is such like an. I've read it so many times throughout my life. I really just think that DC needs to like. I feel like I haven't seen like a collected edition of it in a while. They really just need to put another collected. I think more people need to read it, especially like newer fans, because everybody goes to like Batman. Start with Batman Year One, but I think your work on Batman is a very like okay, you don't understand the character, you've never really read a comic about the character, it's a really good place to start as well.
Mm,
Like to get a vibe of what he's about. What like a lot of the plot beats
Yeah.
that you touch on is stuff that's repeated in Batman history. It's not just like about his personality, it's like the way that he interacts with his villains, the love interest, the way you played like his identity into it. If you're watching this and you have not checked out Mr. Englehart's run on Batman's trade operations, definitely do because it's really good stuff.
Yeah, I was gonna say something similar like with the villains. You see Batman like with Deadshot, with Joker, with that. You see him like in different elements and environments and how he navigates that. Even though like doesn't give backdrop to the character, it's enough to know. And when seeing him interact with these different characters, they're like, okay, this is what makes Batman, and this is what the character of Batman is, and what he always should be and will be.
it's really amazing that 50 years later, anybody even remembers comic books from that era. But that was a really good era for comic books, and it turned out that it becomes history.
Comic books are such like an important industry, and like you mentioned that it was like once a very tight-knit community and now it's become a lot bigger because of like the movies and stuff, but I still think there is a sense of like tight-knitness in the comic book community because it's like a compared to other mediums, like it's a little bit of an outcast sometimes. People don't always take it seriously, but I think it's a very important medium, and like the people that are into comics and like local comic book stores, the culture around it and the artists and like
Yeah.
creators behind it creates this really like great, beautiful community.
Yeah. No, I agree.
And it's good to see that like a lot had we spoke throughout like that things have changed since when you worked on Strange Apparitions to now. But also I think there are a lot of things that have been similar in people's love for comics and like the way
Mhm.
these characters have transformed over the years. But yeah, no, thank you for being with us today. Thank you so much for your work and for creating this great story, and not just on Batman, but everything you've done.
Well, thanks for having me.
The Illustrated Underground signing off. Hope you guys enjoy this Batman-centric episode.
All right, peace out, everybody.